we're going to do something a little different today. Instead of me summarizing what the takeaway messages I think are from the rule, I'm going to show you a little video, completely unrelated to anything else. Just follow the directions in the video, and I want a number by the time you're done.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes.
What number did you get? 15? Higher? Lower? That's fine. We're not keeping score. But keep this video in mind. We will come back to it in a little bit. But until then, enjoy the rest of the video. Welcome back to the channel. So today we are wrapping up Rule 4, which was to compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. So in this part of the video, we will be talking about vision, attention, and the Bible. Let's jump into it. Just kidding. One more thing before getting into the video itself. I have narrative cues for the different parts of the video, and if you're not familiar, let me explain. This, with the book in the lower right corner, indicates that I am talking directly about the book, Peterson's advice, or what he's saying, things like that. This, with the Pikachu in the lower left corner, means I'm giving my interpretation of what he said, talking about my experiences, or other things that are just me. Pikachu in the lower left corner with the safety goggles means I'm talking about experiments, either the ones that Peterson talks about, or bringing in my own research for supporting different things. All right, now to the actual video. Pearson done goofed. He started talking visual attention. We're in my house now. We'll start with the cold hard science before getting to Peterson's interpretation of it. We talked some about attention in Rule 2, Part 1, but we'll talk about more today. So if you recall, or not, I'm not testing you, it's fine. A lot of visual attention processing happens up in the parietal cortex, and it gets its information from the visual cortex, which then gets its information from the eyes. We are going to be focusing on the attention stuff today. An interesting quirk of attention that we already talked about is that you require attention to bind features to objects. So if you see a bunch of stuff really quickly, you might be able to say there were 3 or 4 things there. One of them was red, one of them was green, but because you didn't have time to attach the features to the objects, you'll be guessing. You know you saw blue and red, but you don't know where. Related to this, your eyes can be pointed at something and you could be looking at something, but if your attention is otherwise engaged, you won't register as having seen it. So now, remember that video at the beginning? Let me play the rest of it for you.
But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted.
Surprise! I mean, not if you had intro psych and saw us before, but otherwise, surprise! Dan Simons, one of the authors on this project, will always hold a special place in my heart because the name of that paper was Gorillas in Our Midst, Sustained Inattentional Blindness for Dynamic Events. Love me a good pun. So what's going on here? Why do some people not see something that seems pretty obvious? Well, it comes down to attention. You have a limited pool of resources for attention. You only got so much. You can think of this kind of like your phone's or your computer's RAM. You have however many gigs of RAM, beyond that, it can't do it. Your attention's kind of the same. There's a limited amount of attention to go around. And the sustained counting task that people were having to do with the ball passing, that's kind of attentionally demanding. And so for some people, they were really focused on this task. Their attention was very much engaged in this task, and there weren't enough resources left over to really pay attention to the gorilla, notice it meander into the shot, and so it wasn't seen. I just want to emphasize here, the gorilla almost certainly passed over your photoreceptors in your eye at some point, and that information made it to the visual cortex. But your attention was otherwise engaged on the counting task, and so the gorilla didn't get extra processing and so wasn't seen. Simons has focused part of his career on these examples of functional blindness when we're not paying attention to something. And as such, he has many demonstrations where we didn't see something that we should have. One more example, because Peterson talks about it. Kinda. Another instance of being blind to something you weren't paying attention to is change blindness. So the previous thing, the gorilla thing, was inattentional blindness because your attention was otherwise engaged. You didn't notice a new thing coming in. With change blindness, because your attention is otherwise engaged, you don't notice a change in an object that's already there. In one striking example of this, people who were just walking around on the Cornell campus were stopped by a Confederate. So if you remember, or not, Confederates are somebody who's in on the experiment. They know what's going on, they're part of the script. So people were stopped and asked for directions by a Confederate. While the Confederate is being given directions by the participant, another couple of Confederates rudely pass through the middle of their conversation with a huge door that obstructs the vision of the participant. Unbeknownst to the participant, one of the door handlers swaps out with the person who had been getting directions. They continue on through. The conversation continued as before, and when the person was done giving directions to the Confederate, the person was then asked, "We're doing a study as part of the psychology department of the sorts of things people pay attention to in the real world. Did you notice anything unusual at all when the door passed by a minute ago?" If the person didn't report seeing a change in the person that they were giving directions to, they were then directly asked, "Did you notice that I'm not the same person who approached you to ask for directions?" At that point, full disclosure of the experiment took place, full debriefing, laughs were had. Good day for science. About half the participants in this experiment didn't notice that the person that they were talking to changed. Half! The person that they had been speaking to, eye contact, gesturing, directions, that person changed and half the people didn't notice. Now, there's definitely boundary conditions for what you can get away with. If somebody was giving directions to me, short, 5'3", woman, purple hair, and I was swapped out with my husband, who is tall, he's like 6'2", a man, and brown hair with facial hair, people would probably notice. We can make it so they might not notice, but people will probably notice. But still, this is something that can happen. Like, you would think people would monitor who they're talking to, but within certain constraints, not really. Anyways, back to Peterson. Peterson begins this section by talking about one of the tamer but still interesting examples of change blindness. And in this, basically, you're looking at a picture and gradually over time something changes. In the instance that Peterson's describing, you're looking at a field of wheat, and over time a road gradually appears in this picture. And most people will miss this change, unless they happen to just look right at the perfect time to catch the road coming into view. People will miss it. But Peterson's reference for this experiment is the gorilla paper, which has nothing to do with those scene changes that he was talking about. Peterson then discusses the gorilla experiment. In an absolutely hair-splitting nitpicky point, Peterson says that a man walked through with a gorilla costume, but the paper clearly and explicitly identifies that a woman walked through in a gorilla costume who was somewhat shorter. And then Peterson discusses something similar to the person swap change blindness experiment. Peterson says that people watched a video of the swap happening instead of having it happen like right in front of them. And he doesn't provide a citation here, so I'm not sure exactly which paper he's talking about. I feel kind of like he's remembering a video special I saw on it too at some point, but can't say for sure. In any case, he's weakening his own argument here. There is a paper where people failed to notice this change right in front of them instead of on video. Anyways, Peterson says that this functional blindness is because vision is expensive, both at the eyeball and higher cognitive levels. And he talks about the retina and how a small portion of it is devoted to the high-resolution vision. The human eye is composed of many structures. Some of note are the cornea, sitting at the front of the eye, and has about 80% of the focusing power. The lens is behind the cornea and is responsible for the other 20% of focusing power, and it's controlled by muscles on the sides of it to control finer focus. So if you're looking at something close, they do one thing, and if you're looking at something far, they do something else. Basically, they can squish together the lens or they can pull it tighter. And as you age, the lens loses its flexibility, and that's why you get old eyes. At the back of the eye is the retina. This is where the light, focused by the cornea and the lens, is imaged. The retina is covered in photoreceptors, which are the light-sensitive cells that transduce the physical light into a neurological signal. Humans have two types of photoreceptors, rods and cones, which are named for how they look under microscope. Rods have good sensitivity, but due to their spacing on the retina, have poor resolution. These guys are good for low light conditions or for detecting motion. Cones have poor sensitivity but good resolution because those little guys are super packed into the fovea and surrounding retina. The cones work best in normal light conditions and provide color vision. If you guys are interested in this type of stuff, let me know. I'm more than happy to go into super detail on this, but for now, this level of detail will have to work. The distribution of these photoreceptors across the retina is not uniform. The cones are mostly found densely packed in the fovea, which is where the light coming in gets focused to. The rods are mostly out in the periphery. You can roughly demonstrate this to yourself. Pick somewhere to look at where you'll have something to hold your vision and stuff out in the periphery. And maintain your focus on that little point, and then shift your attention, but not your eyes, to the stuff in the periphery. And what you'll notice is that stuff out of your central vision will be blurry, and it might have color if you're familiar with the objects, but if you're not familiar with the object, like if you have a friend bring something into your peripheral vision, you'll kind of be guessing at what the color is. Your brain does a lot of processing to kind of trick you into thinking things are hunky-dory when it's kind of a clusterfuck. So if you know roughly what the object is, there's previously existing object files that can try to say like, oh, the tennis ball, it's probably yellow because tennis balls are yellow. And it might be a weird green one that you don't find out about until it's up in your central vision. So you might be able to get some color information out there because we do have cones out in the periphery, mostly the S-type, which are sensitive to more the blue end. So there is some color information, but for the most part, color happens from your central vision. The information from the photoreceptors at the back of the eye is then passed through several steps of processing before reaching the V1 area of the visual cortex, which is the first step of cortical processing it gets. In the visual cortex, the fovea, so again, that central vision, gets more of a representation and more processing power. So to nerd out a little bit, in very, very central vision, your cones will get a 1-to-1 relationship with the cortical representation. As you move out from that central vision, they start being compressed a bit. So instead of a 1-to-1, you might have 10 cones being passed to one neuron, or 100 cones being passed to one neuron. So there is some signal compression happening as you move out from very central vision. The information from the periphery is not being discarded, at any point really. As I mentioned before, the rods are better at detecting motion than your cones. So if you see unexpected motion out in the periphery, your attention hones in on it and says, let's point our eyeballs there, figure out what's going on, and if this is a threat or not. And this is part of why the person in the gorilla costume in that video walked a little weird like they did, because they were trying to do it as a gradual, not abrupt motion, because that would instantly grab your attention and you would see the gorilla. Okay, back to Peterson.
If all your retina was fovea, you would require the skull of a B-movie alien to house your brain. In consequence, we triage when we see. Most of our vision is peripheral and low resolution. We save the fovea for things of importance. We point our high-resolution capacities at a few specific things we are aiming at, and we let everything else, which is almost everything, fade unnoticed into the background.
I'm questioning if Peterson took a perception class at any point. Yes, a lot of processing power is devoted to the fovea, and if the retina was entirely covered in cones like it is in the fovea, and we had the same sort of compression and signal processing happening that we do in the fovea, our occipital lobe would be huge. But the question really is what we would benefit from having a retina full of these light-hungry, not great at motion, but high acuity photoreceptors. Plus the issue that arises because our eye is designed to focus light at one point, not disperse a focused image across the back of the retina. I can tell you some costs associated with that for sure. If somebody was to only have cones, no rods, it's rare, but it does happen, they'd have a hard time. So in low light conditions, your rods do their best. You can demonstrate this by going to a movie during the day. Bright outside, buy your ticket, get into the movie theater, and you're practically blind. You can't see anything yet. Your rods need a little bit of time to recover from being blinded by the bright light, but eventually they do come online and you're able to see. By the time that the movie's over, you're able to navigate out of the theater without incident. Without rods, motion would be harder to process. Seeing the grass rustle or the leaves move is a great indicator that there's a predator afoot and that we need to pay attention to that. So do we need to have this high definition color vision everywhere? And I don't think we do. It's not like our brains are starved for information that our poor little feeble eyes can't provide. Our brains are doing a good amount of processing with the information they're getting. And I also think it's important to mention the trade-off that's happening. Having the cones in central vision with the rods out in the periphery gives us a nice balance of having that color high acuity vision in the central field of focus and having supplementary information that's also good at lower light conditions out in the periphery. Conflating what you look at with aim and value irks me. Also, hopefully I've highlighted that the stuff in your peripheral vision isn't just thrown away. It's used and it's useful and it's important. Also, the cognitive blindness experiments demonstrate that you can be looking at something and not see it. That's the point. That's why it's inattentional blindness or change blindness. You're not seeing it. Just like Peterson in the gorilla paper. He probably looked at it, but he didn't really see it. Peterson says that when you're paying attention to something, Unless the thing that you're not paying attention to gets in the way of the thing that you are paying attention to, you won't see it. And as such, he says that the gorilla never got in the way of the basketball counting task. So when you're paying attention to something, Peterson says that something weird won't get noticed unless it blocks whatever it is you're paying attention to. And so he says that the gorilla in the experiment never got in the way of the ball counting task, and as such, the gorilla went unnoticed. But the gorilla did get in the way of the ball. Twice, at least.
That's how you deal with the overwhelming complexity of the world. You ignore it, while you concentrate minutely on your private concerns. You see things that facilitate your movement forward toward your desired goals. You detect obstacles when they pop up in your path. You're blind to everything else, and there's a lot of everything else, so you're very blind. You must shepherd your limited resources carefully. Seeing is very difficult, so you must choose what to see and let the rest go.
Could you let it go? Would you let it go? When? Hopefully, I've set up why this line of thinking is reductive and not representative of how vision and attention actually work. Peterson brings up that in the Hindu Vedas, the perceived world is an illusion. Our needs and our desires color what we see. I'm not an expert on Hinduism, so if you are, and Peterson's right or wrong, please let us all know in the comments below. We switch back to the blindness train of thought, with Peterson emphasizing how much of the world we're ignoring. And he says that when things start going wrong, this ignored part of the world can become overwhelming, but that it also holds the key to the solution. If you're unhappy, maybe it's because you blinded yourself to what actually would be making you happy, and that it's really there in front of you all along. To unblind yourself, you need to build your knowledge, retool your values, change your needs, and get a handle on your wants. His example for this is you wanting your boss's job. Details are not provided about why you want your boss's job, but you do. And he says that irritation, unhappiness, and disgust are the consequence of wanting your boss's job and not being able to have it. And his solution here is to figure out the root need, want, desire that isn't being met, sacrifice your ambition, and to try to improve your life in some other way. A lot of this was noise to me because I was still sort of fleshing out this scenario he set up. Why would somebody want their boss's job? Well, maybe they want their boss's job because they are overskilled and kind of bored at their current job. If that's the case, they should try to secure a promotion, and if that doesn't work out, start job hunting. Maybe they're itching to move into management. If they can swing it at their current job, maybe take on additional responsibilities, maybe there's like a middle management position, and if not, maybe it's time to start looking for a new job. Maybe they don't like their boss. If they don't like their boss, see if they can be transferred somewhere else inside the company. Otherwise, maybe it's time to start looking for a new job. Maybe they want a pay raise. If that's the case, they can try negotiating with their employer to get a raise based on skills or other merits. And if their employer refuses to budge, maybe it's time to look for a new job. Given what half my advice was for all of my different scenarios, you can probably imagine my annoyance at Peter's suggestion that people sacrifice their ambition and focus their energies elsewhere in improving their life. This sacrificing your ambition to work on your life in other areas advice will only work, however, if you genuinely want your life to improve, to retool, to take stock, to aim somewhere better. You have to think it through, bottom to top. You have to scour your psyche, and you must be cautious because making your life better means adopting a lot of responsibility. And that takes more effort and care than living stupidly in pain and remaining arrogant, deceitful, and resentful. Always a great caveat when starting a new treatment. It'll work if you want it to, and if it doesn't work, it's because you didn't want enough. Kind of like Tindies, if you guys remember those. Yes, I know. You get a little bit of wiggle room here because we're talking about a psychological treatment, but putting the failure onus on the client instead of on the practitioner is kind of a sketch move. You either do what he says, or you live stupidly in all of that stuff he talked about. I really hope this wasn't the approach he took with his clients. Next is stuff sounding a lot like the prosperity gospel or the secret.
What if it was the case that the world revealed whatever goodness it contains in precise proportion to your desire for the best?
A bit of yada yada, then.
This is not theology, it's not mysticism, it's empirical knowledge.
So it's not the prosperity gospel or the secret. It's empirical knowledge. Just so we're clear. Another Peterson logic flow. We only see what we aim at, so aim somewhere different. See what you were previously blind to. Pursue higher goals. Profit. Guess which one of those I made up? To begin, you need to put your wants and needs into a hierarchy of value, such as petting the kitty. That goes right on top. Done it.
Our values, our morality, they are indicators of our sophistication.
This is a long quote, but I don't want to be accused of misrepresenting what he's saying.
The philosophical study of morality, of right and wrong, is ethics. Such study can render us more sophisticated in our choices. Even older and deeper than ethics, however, is religion. Religion concerns itself not with mere right and wrong, but with good and evil themselves, with the archetypes of right and wrong. Religion concerns itself with domains of value, ultimate value. That is not the scientific domain. It's not the territory of empirical description.
So, the thing is, how did more complicated constructs, like religion, good and evil, how did they come into existence before the less complex things of right and wrong? It's not adding up here. He did just try to write himself a get out of jail free card on this by saying that morality, ethics, right and wrong, good and evil, these are not to be studied by science. And I'm saying nope, they absolutely are. Do you remember the monkey video of unjust cucumbers? That was science. There is an implication that without religion, your aim will be off and then you will be lost. And also that the religion needs to have dogma and values and standards in order to set your hierarchy of value correctly.
Does this mean that what we see is dependent on our religious beliefs? Yes, and what we don't see as well. You might object,
but I'm an atheist.
No, you're not. You're simply not an atheist in your actions, and it is your actions that must accurately reflect your deepest beliefs. You can only find out what you actually believe rather than what you think you believe by watching how you act. You simply don't know what you believe before that. You're too complex to understand yourself.
Lily, my friend, has asked me how I can read this book without throwing it against the wall repeatedly. And most of the time, it's a little annoying, but water off a duck's back. This, however, this pissed me off. I am apparently, emphatically, not an atheist because Lobster Daddy knows me better than I do. Apparently, people can't be good without at least one Sky Daddy being involved. Fucking brilliant. You need to understand the wants that you've gained from the collective unconscious and from evolution.
You don't understand anything. You didn't even know that you were blind.
Okay, so at this point in this chapter, we've been told that we suck, we don't really know who we are or what we believe, we're broken, we're not really atheists if we say we're atheists, and that we don't understand anything. At this point, it seems like his fans and followers would be better referred to as victims. Peterson says that the Bible is the foundational document of Western civilization, of Western values, Western morality, and Western conceptions of good and evil. Bold claim. I wouldn't say that the Bible isn't in there, but there's more than just the Bible that make up the Western canon. Then he implies that the Bible was written out of the collective unconscious, and that studying it is the only way to really understand what you believe. Okay. Peterson basically describes Old Testament God as a Chad. He's strong, uncompromising, tough, but fair. And he says that the authors of the Old Testament were living in very extreme times and conditions, and they really had to trust that their Creator had a plan for them. He describes New Testament God as the kind, loving Father who's compassionate and forgiving. And then he whips out Nietzsche to try to explain the weirdness of the two God personalities, thereby avoiding doing any of the intellectual heavy lifting himself. Back to you wanting your boss's job, briefly. You decide to aim for a better life instead of a better office. I am 100% on board with a healthy work-life balance, and I also think that somebody shouldn't be defined by what their job is. I'd be fucked if that was the case. However, this constant browbeating about sacrificing your ambition is unhelpful and kind of toxic. Peterson says that your aims will change slightly as you see more. So improving your life will turn into improving your family's life, will turn into improving strangers' lives, all the way out to thinking about your enemies, maybe not improving their lives, but thinking about them. And along the way, your time scale will change. So instead of just improving your now, you will want to improve the future, all the way out to eternity. And at this point, better means to aim at the improvement of being, with a capital I and a capital B. By doing this, somehow, you'll be able to treat Old Testament God as the same God as New Testament God, and doing this will allow you to
act as if existence might be justified by its goodness, if only you behave properly. And it is that decision, that declaration of existential faith, that allows you to overcome nihilism and resentment and arrogance. It is that declaration of faith that keeps hatred of being, with all its attendant evils, at bay.
Gotta keep those faith wards up and charged in order to keep the chaotic nihilism snake away. Peterson redefines faith as
the realization that the tragic irrationalities of life must be counterbalanced by an equally irrational commitment to the essential goodness of being.
Oh, good! Now we're redefining what words mean. Super! This will definitely make the writing more clear and easier to read moving forward. So how does one declare existential faith?
You might start by not thinking, or more accurately, but less trenchantly, by refusing to subjugate your faith to your current rationality and its narrowness of view. This doesn't mean make yourself stupid. It means the opposite. It means instead that you must quit maneuvering and calculating and conniving and scheming and enforcing and demanding and avoiding and ignoring and punishing. It means you must place your old strategies aside. It means, instead, that you must pay attention as you may never have paid attention before.
Hear that? Toss your rationality out the window. You won't need it in your shiny new future. Something's not adding up here, and it's not because I switched off my brain. By pay attention, Peterson means to look around you and see if there's anything bothering you. If you find something bothering you, basically replay that self-help scene from earlier. Could you fix it? Would you fix it? When? If you answer no to any of those questions, you need to aim lower. Find a smaller thing that's bothering you to work on. And then some advice straight out of a White Stripes song, Little Acorns. Take those big problems, break them apart into small, manageable problems, and tackle those small problems, and eventually the big problem will be fixed. Another example of finding a little bit of joy in reading this book as an inadvertent autobiography.
What do you know about yourself? You are, on the one hand, the most complex thing in the entire universe, and on the other, someone who can't even set the clock on your microwave. Don't overestimate your self-knowledge.
It brings me a little bit of happiness to imagine all of the digital clocks in Peterson's house just sitting there blinking, begging for the order of being set, and Peterson looking down at them all and going, "No, I don't know how." Peterson instructs us to do at least one little thing each day that will make our lives better.
Aim high. Set your sights on the betterment of being. Align yourself in your soul with truth and the highest good. There is habitable order to establish, and beauty to bring into existence. There is evil to overcome, suffering to ameliorate, and yourself to better.
I was wondering when order and chaos were going to show up again. It's been a while. Why am I happy about this? And again, with some repeated comments from me. I guess since I'm not an atheist anymore, I can align my soul with what he's telling me to. Good thing he established that already, otherwise I might be taking issue with this. Truth and higher good being capitalized here. It'd be nice if you would define what those meant at any point so I wouldn't have to make conjectures about what he's meaning here. As always, no small acts in the Peterson universe. By tackling these small little things, you are fighting evil. He's not advocating for a balance of order and chaos here, just like he rarely does. He's telling us to establish order so we can keep the ugly chaos away. But chaos isn't by its nature ugly. Chaos can be beautiful. In the start of Peterson wrapping up this chapter, he says that the transition from the Old Testament to the New Testament reflects people maturing from this thou shalt not of the Old Testament to a more mature, fully articulated, positive vision of the true individual. He says that Jesus' Sermon on the Mount put forward the true aim for people. After going through the declaration of existential faith process, you need to live your life in the now and not be blinded by yourself. Then he provides Luke 12:22 through 34 to support this. I'm not a biblical scholar, keep saying that, it's still the case, but what I gather of this section is that it's Jesus telling his disciples not to worry about where their food or their clothes are coming from because Sky Daddy has their back. But they need to put Sky Daddy first and live for the day. Feel free to correct me here, but I don't feel like this is lining up as well as Peterson would like. And when I say correct me, I don't mean tell me to watch all of his lectures, read maps of meaning, read other things, no. Some of those are on the list of to-do, but quit it. We close this chapter with Peterson telling us that life will be better now because we've learned not to manipulate, be envious, be up in other people's business, play the martyr, or get frustrated because we've learned to aim low and be patient. Golly gee, thanks, I'm cured!
Now, your trajectory is heavenward. That makes you hopeful. Even a man on a sinking ship can be happy when he clambers aboard a lifeboat. And who knows where he might go in the future? Ask, and ye shall receive. Knock, and the door will open. If you ask, as if you want, and knock, as if you want to enter, you may be offered the chance to improve your life a little, a lot, completely. And with that improvement, some progress will be made in being itself. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
What energies and desires you throw out to the universe will return to you several-fold. Praise be. As with so many of these chapters, if the chapter title was the core message without the stylistic madness and elaboration, I wouldn't have a problem with the advice. Comparing your now to where you've been previously instead of comparing your now against other people is pretty good advice. I mean, it's good to compare yourself against other people who are more successful than you because you can see what they're doing differently, what's working for them, what hasn't worked for them, and borrow approaches or techniques that you think might help you along the way. But if you start comparing what you have against what they have, then you're starting to take a trip to Unhappy Town. But the rest of this chapter, why? Why make the weird parallel between cognitive attentional blindness and what people's goals are? Doesn't make sense. I will allow myself this occasion to say explicitly and outright that his pushing of the Bible and Christianity as a way that people need to examine what their values are and what they believe is bullshit. Nowhere in this chapter does he say, I'm a Christian and therefore I think that my way is the best way for everybody else to live their life. But from the way a huge chunk of this chapter is written, it's pretty clear that that's what his agenda is. Also, I want to draw a little bit of attention to some hypocrisy happening here. If you recall, at the beginning of the chapter, Peterson was very against this social psychology positivity lie, as he called it, and said that this way of living was awful. But by the end of the chapter, he's pushing us to abandon our rationality and sacrifice our ambition and embrace the goodness of being, and that will provide us meaning. Potato, potato. I mean, as a non-believer, these kind of sound similar to me. Alright, to wrap up, let's try to get some less weird life advice. First, take what your inner critic says with a grain of salt. If yours is like mine, you might have to just drown it in salt in order to get the little bits of truth, but listen to it and take what it says into consideration. It may be completely miscalibrated and out of proportion with things, but there might be little nuggets of truth there that you can work on. Somewhat related to this is if you are the big fish in a little pond and you find yourself moving to a big pond and are now a little fish, this is a chance for growth. Look at the big fish in the pond and try to learn from them. See if they have anything they can teach you, see what lessons you can take, and this is an opportunity for growth. You don't have to stay the big fish in the little pond for those serotonin hits or whatever. You should try to live your life honestly and unapologetically, but if you can't for various reasons, that's okay. You aren't supporting tyranny if you are afraid to come out as gay or as an atheist to your parents. We all have problems. It's part of being human. We are not broken. We have things that we can work on and grow and improve on, but to say that we need to be fixed is not helpful. If bribing yourself gets you to do those little steps to start improving your life, so be it. But the important part here is to start building habits, positive habits that you can stick to. If you integrate these positive habits in your life will improve, with or without bribery. This one's mostly for Peterson, but there are atheists, bucko. Finally, it's good to know your limitations. Getting frustrated isn't the end of the world and the path to nihilism. If you're getting frustrated doing something, that means it might be beyond your current skill level. That's okay. If you're getting frustrated, maybe take a step back, see if there's an easier step or process or something that you can work on, take a little bit of a break, come back to it. That's fine. This is how we grow. Alrighty, end of video, YouTube Holy Trinity. Like, comment, subscribe. You can become one of my patron saints by supporting the channel on Patreon. You can always catch me on Twitter. You can join some very lovely people in a wonderful discussion on Discord, and links for all of these are in the description box below. And yeah, see you guys next week.